Hey everyone, welcome to Watch Complications. I'm Brian. Consider subscribing if you like what you see. If you want to support the channel a little bit more, hit the join button you'll see under the video and become a member. It gives you a few extra perks, and my links to Instagram and my website Watch Complications are in the video description below. Now obviously you've clicked on this video, the title's probably like, what are you talking about? Whether you just discovered Watch Complications or you've been around for a while, what's Brian doing? These aren't even comparable types of watches. Is this tongue-in-cheek? Is he trolling either the fanboys, the people that want to say Pagani Design, well, it's just as good, I can't get the real thing? Well, I'm a child of the 80s. I wore this shirt just for this occasion. We're going to settle this like adults. There are lots of channels and reviews that are oriented towards the Rolex world and Rolex fan base. There are a lot of low-end, entry-level sorts of review channels that include a lot of Pagani Design watches or the like. Here at Watch Complications, I try to instill sort of an appreciation of everything across the spectrum, from those entry $10 Casios all the way up to haute horology. I've got stuff clear across the spectrum. And what I haven't seen is a video where someone had actual Rolex watches in their possession, plus a Pagani Design watch or watches in their possession, and actually set them down next to each other and discuss them collectively, taking a look, considering the pros and cons. Every watch, I believe, has pros and cons. I've yet to find the perfect one, maybe someday. But you know, it's worth, if you're gonna say, well, this is a great, wonderful watch, or this is just a cheap copy knockoff, what are the differences between them? You know, a lot of terms get thrown around: homage, knockoff, copy. Of course, the Pagani designs are meant to mimic Rolex, as some other brands do as well, but they're not one-to-one copies per se. But what are the height differences, quality and material differences, you know, the way they actually look next to each other? As I kick off this video, I first want to thank my authorized dealer, my AD, in the New England area. That's Periwinkles. It is just a phenomenal Rolex dealership, and if you want to find a dealer, say you're in one of the big metro areas in New England, even the Bostons and New Yorks, I mean, people drive from all over New England to come to this particular dealer because they have such an amazing staff. They really work hard to get you what you like, but they will sort of make sure that you really want it. Not the flippers. They want to sell products to people that are going to cherish them, love them. They care about it either from an enthusiast standpoint, maybe a collecting standpoint. Periwinkle's reviews speak for themselves, and I just couldn't be happier in the relationship I have with them. But now for myself, I am waiting on one more particular Rolex model. But for this video, they were able to provide some content and some help around some of the models that I'm going to show. And so I extremely appreciate it, especially Winkle. Thank you so much. I cannot recommend Periwinkles enough if you're in the New England area and you're looking for the best service around Rolex. This looks all right. And don't worry, I'm going to give you plenty of views. But then the question I have is, what's it look like, feel like next to an actual Daytona? This Pagani Design Chronograph. There's the Pagani Design PT Time. It mimics the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. What's it look like next to an actual 39mm OP? Here it is. I'm going to take actual Daytonas next to the Pagani Design Chronograph. I'm going to take the Pagani Design PT Time next to the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. Those are sort of my two favorite Rolexes. And we're going to just put them neck and neck and just talk about it and have some fun. Leave your comments down below. Happy to talk all things about it. Pros, cons, likes, dislikes. Let's just do it. All right, so what I want to do is start with a little bit of context for these two specific models that I want to contrast and compare. The Rolex is the Oyster Perpetual 39mm. This is the 114-300 dark rhodium. I think this specific one was made in 2019. Now here in 2022, the Rolex Oyster Perpetuals are now 41mm. So a little bit bigger and different colors. So the dark rhodium isn't available, and it's got sort of the colorful models. Like there was this coral red, and there's the green and turquoise. And so lots of brighter colors, which is what the Pagani Design 2022 models are pulling from more in terms of the color. This was a style color I thought I would like the best personally. Might be giving this one away though. The dial markers on the 2022 Pagani Design are mimicking the ones on the 2022 Rolex models. So they get the double batons at 3, 6, and 9, whereas on the little bit older Rolex Oyster Perpetual 39, got the single markers at 3, 6, and 9 with a lume. So what I'm saying overall is the Pagani has a little bit more of the design characteristics of the more modern Rolex OP, but the reason why this pairing works well with the compare and contrast is because they're both 39mm models. And if you're looking into these Pagani Design models, they have variants without the date and with the date. Of course, if you know me, I prefer without the date, particularly on a basic simple dress watch style like this. And not only does it have the date variants, they also have a turquoise, like a silver color, a sunburst style dark blue, and black. So there's a few different color options for the Pagani as well. I want to be really clear about this. Pagani is mimicking design characteristics of the Rolex, as a lot of brands do, but it is not a copy. It's not trying to pass off as a Rolex. It is branded Pagani Design. They have their own writing. They have their own differences in types of materials and the sizing and everything. So it's not like it's passing itself off as a fake. I mean, if you want to call it a copy, fine. I'm not going to disagree with the fact that they copy design principles, but there's a difference between doing that, as a lot of companies do in all kinds of industries for all kinds of reasons, whether good or bad. Now, I am not going to bore you with every aspect of the spec list on these things, but initially, at least for me, whenever I opened the Pagani Design, I thought, man, are you sure that's not 41mm? It looks a lot bigger visually, like the diameter, than the Rolex OP. And there's reasons for that, but it does. It looks bigger. So this probably just visually initially would look a little bit more similar to a 41mm. So to talk diameter, they are right at about 39mm, just a shade over. The Pagani Design is 39.2, the Rolex is 39.1. So just a 1/10 of a millimeter difference. So the visual look of why this one looks bigger than the other is not because of the diameter itself. Two leading contributing factors to it just looking bigger, wider, is because, one, notice the lug width. Let me pop in a little bit closer here. As you can see, the actual width of the lugs is much more substantial and significant on the Pagani than on the Rolex. And when it comes to wearability, look, feel, size, in terms of how something goes on the wrist, is lug to lug. And there we have a 2mm difference. So the lug to lug on the Pagani is 49.2, a little over, and the lug to lug on the Rolex is 47.4, give or take. So we got a 2mm larger lug to lug, much thicker, wider lugs, and that's what's contributing to this one looking a lot bigger. I think one of the other major contributing factors, and you can see it good at this sort of more zoomed out view, is the crown on the Rolex is a lot slimmer profile. So that also just generally as your eye hits it makes it look a little bit bigger because the crown itself has a taller profile. So those factors all put together just make the Pagani Design look bigger, but don't let it fool you. The actual diameters are within a 1/10 of each other. So along with the lug to lug, the weight, the crown profile, another significant visual difference between the two are the side profiles, the case height. Now, the height on the Rolex is 11.35. The height on the Pagani is 11.5. So we have a 1.5mm difference, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot when it comes to case height. Every millimeter, every ½ millimeter matters. So you do get a little bit of a slimmer profile from just the raw height. You can see that the case back for the Rolex adds a little bit to that overall height. You've got the very thin case, low profile of the bezel and crystal, where Rolex is getting some of that height is in the case back, which of course sinks into your wrist. So this sits really thin. It looks much thinner than an 11mm watch, whereas the Pagani, that height is all in the top. You might say it's not just, that's not the case back. So it just has what looks like visually a much taller case. Now the bezel is also taller and thicker on the Pagani Design. You see they're polished. They tried to maintain sort of the same profile lug shape, but again you can see that height and the width of the lugs being significantly more. So on paper, again, they're only 1.5 millimeters apart, but visually, man, they look very different side by side. And you'll see this with the chronographs as well. Something else that's a big difference between the two is that the Pagani Design is about 20 grams heavier, even though the bracelet material feels a lot cheaper because it is. Feels a little bit lighter in some ways that you hold it and whatnot, but it is quite a bit heavier. Of course, the Rolex feels a lot more sturdy. You don't get the clinking and clanking as you move, the links around, and the clasp is, of course, a lot better quality. This just feels like a cheap bracelet. Now, regarding the bracelet, that's a major weakness of these Pagani Design watches. They just typically feel cheap. I'll come back to this in a second, but the bracelet that came on the PT Time, similar to the one that came on their Chronograph, which we'll get into in a little bit, feels not quite as good quality as this one I got a couple years ago. They call this the Explorer, but you can see it's meant to look like a little bit more like the Yachtmaster in terms of the Rolex styling. But this bracelet has felt more solid to me than any of the other Paganis that have sort of come through my little world since trying them out. So I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just the specific factory, or maybe they've just changed the actual quality, going a little bit lower since. I don't know. But that one was always felt really good, really solid. But the two I got for this review, the PT Time and the Chronograph, they just feel a little bit cheaper. I do appreciate on the PT Time having the links fully brushed. Gives it sort of that satin feel. The other model, the Chronograph, the center links are polished, so there's the contrast between the sides and the center. But I like this look. You can tell though, when you're looking at the Rolex OP, you got a 904 stainless steel, but generic stainless steel in the Pagani Design. But the Rolex, of course, has the same brushed links, satin look. But man, you can see here, as the lighting sort of shifts and changes as I move my hands, that softer 904 steel has a lot more of a luster, sheen to it than your standard steel that's simply just been brushed. You can see it. It's pretty obvious how different, even though they're both steel, both brushed, this certainly stands out as something unique and different. Now, I will say about the clasps, these are pretty weak, although it does have a nice adjustable end links here, and you can do micro adjusting stuff in there, but it's got the folding clasp, goes down like that, feels a little bit sharp on the edges, cheaply made. The best thing you can do with some of these, I'll leave this bracelet on this one, but like with Chronographs, like get that thing off there and put it on a strap, a leather strap, a rubber strap, something like that. So the clasps on these Pagani Designs, not particularly great, whereas on the Rolex, just pop down, right? Single O, easy O. So, of course, the action's a lot smoother, and it doesn't feel cheap. I still got the sticker on the back, of course, solid case back on the OP. I don't know, maybe someday I'll take the sticker off. I wear it all the time. Why not? And on the Pagani Design, we also have a solid case back. A bit of cheaper feel, obviously. I've still got the sticker on there also, but it's got, water resistant, Pagani Design. They got a little, image there, nice to look at kind of thing. So yeah, but that's what the backs look like on these things. Of course, they're both sapphire crystals. The PD here has very generic quality sapphire, so it's not like super high quality. But they both have screw down crowns. The PD has about 200 meter water resistance. That's what they say. I don't know if I would trust that. So on paper, this is supposed to have more water resistance than the Rolex. Now, I know with this I'm going to get that, if not more. On the PD, that's just playing with fire probably when you dunk it in the water. That's a fun little joke. It's got hacking. It's like I said, it's the Seiko NH35, so it's a reasonably legit movement that they've put in this. I mean, for $100, you're getting a reasonable movement. It's very mainstream these days, used in a lot of micro brands and Seikos and modding and stuff. Of course, it's nowhere near the cost rating of the Rolex, which also has a 48-hour power reserve. You get about 40 hours on the NH35. Now, of course, this is comparing a $100 watch versus a $6,000 watch, worth a lot more now. But, for what you're getting, $100, it's like, you don't want to spend $6 grand, or if you're talking gray market now, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 grand, $100, it's actually a reasonable movement in an okay package. You know, minus really the bracelet, the rest of it's pretty okay. You can also, again, see in this part of the video just the difference in the steel, the shade that you're getting, the luster and shine to the Rolex that you just don't get with this other type of steel being used on the Pagani. Now, Lume is very different on these watches, not just the quality, but the actual Lume application. So on the Rolex, you've just got Lume at the 3, 6, and 9, and on the hands, you know, hour and minute, you've got the same sort of style of hand with the hour and minute, but less Lume and much lower quality on the hands. Now you've got Lume through all the markers. You've got the triangle here at 12, which is, of course, deviates from this Oyster Perpetual look. That pulls a little bit more from the visuals of the other types of models. Lume, you can expect to last like 10, 15 minutes, even on just a reasonable charge, which isn't that much. I will say, though, with the indexes on the Pagani Design and the Lume application, it's very sharp. The finishing is not that bad. It's actually pretty good. The printing is good. Of course, you get under macro, you're going to see some issues like you would about see on anything, but it's not half bad. You know, the finishing, I was actually a little bit surprised by this one when I pulled it out. It's very, very sharp. You know, Rolex, one of the big gripes I have with a lot of their models is that they write too much text on their watches. They really should just cut that out. It's ridiculous sometimes. You get like 10 lines of text on a dial face. It just gets out of order. So on the Pagani, it's just too much text for me. I really don't like that they put PT time on there. Maybe put it on the case back or something if you want to say, hey, here's a model name for the thing. Just have the automatic 20 bar, because what that it really boils down to is you have 3 different fonts in play on the main part of the dial here. Of course, you can see the Japan movement. That's for the Seiko. But you've got this weird font for PT time, sort of a standard looking font for the automatic and, you know, water rating. And then you've got the Pagani Design logo text, having 3 lines here as opposed to 2 at 6 o'clock on the Rolex. But this just flows and looks better because, well, it's similar fonts being used. It doesn't look extremely high contrast where they throw just this weird childish, it's like putting Comic Sans on a dial. That's probably the, maybe that's what it is. The rest of it doesn't bother me, like the Pagani Design logo stuff, that doesn't bother me. Having the automatic 20 bar doesn't bother, but they put what looks like almost like just a childish looking font. Kind of ruins the whole dial for me, to be honest. I mean, think how good this would look without that PT time. It would look pretty good. So yeah, it is what it is, and that's my gripe with the dial and the text. So all in all, of course, it's apples and oranges. Rolex is what it is. It's a high-end, high-quality Swiss-made watch. Here we've got, you know, a low-cost Chinese-made homage, although it does have the Japanese movement in it, which the NH35 holds its own in terms of workhorse movements and what's out and about there, and being able to get replacements for it, easy to do maintenance on, that kind of jazz. So that's nice. And for the cost, you really can't complain too much. It's kind of fun seeing them side to side. Big differences for me, though, are on case height, slim profile, the lug differences, and the weight differences. When all that's all said and done, boils down to it, of course, the Rolex is just going to have that more luxurious feel about it. And you know, you could have said, Brian, no, duh. But hey, come on, we're just having fun. We're looking at these sort of opposite ends of the spectrum watches next to each other. And yeah, you know, why not? What else are we going to do? You weren't going to do anything else otherwise. We'll watch videos on YouTube. So now I'm going to move on to the chronographs. But for that, I'm moving to a different setting because I was chilling out at the AD, playing around with some of the Daytona models and the PD chronograph to do the comparison there. So I'm going to shift visual. It's a little bit more dark, and that's just because of being inside of the AD. Yeah, let's take a look at a Pagani Design Chrono versus the good old Daytona. Okay, so the Rolex we're going to do the majority of the comparison with in this part of the video is the 116503. This is a two-tone steel and gold. Retails for the hefty price tag of $17,950. Youch. I'll switch back and forth between showing this watch on the wrist and side by side with the Pagani Design Chronograph to show off some other aspects of the PD 1676, which is sort of an old school vintage Daytona look. So this is even more apples and oranges than the previous comparison. These are both 40 millimeter. They've both got the screw down pushers and screw down crown, sapphire crystal. The big difference between these two is that the Rolex is a mechanical movement. Pagani Design has a mecha quartz movement, specifically the Seiko VK63. So with the small seconds at 6, you can see that usual 1 second step with the seconds hand. But when you activate the chronograph, you get what looks more like a mechanical look and feel with the multi-beat steps of the chronograph hand and a nice flyback. And so with specs like weight, it's not really comparable. I mean, you've got a mechanical movement, which has a little bit more weight to it than a quartz movement. We're just putting these side by side for fun because of the size, dimensions, the look, but they really are at opposite ends of the spectrum, obviously. Duh. I might even go more in depth once I have my own 116-500, but that we'll see how long that takes. Both watches are in that 39 to 40 millimeter range, depending on where you measure that diameter in the case. You got about a 46.5 versus a 47.5 lug to lug. So again, that Pagani Design a little bit longer. And then the height, again, about 12.5 versus a 13.5. And so those little extra millimeters in height and lug to lug, and really just the profile of the case from the side, all those factors contribute to that same issue we saw with the previous comparison. It just looks like an overall better watch, a slimmer watch. And even though it's mimicking some of those design characteristics, these two cases look much more significantly different when you start looking up close. And you can't really complain. The Pagani Design looks pretty good. Finishing's okay. It's got a nice ceramic bezel. So once you get it on a nice strap, it's really not so bad. Of course, the case back isn't very good, sort of cheap stainless steel, very basic design, and the water resistance on this one is 100 meters, they say. And of course, the Daytona also says it has 100 meters. Again, I would trust the Rolex rating a lot more than I would trust the Pagani Design. However, my Pagani Design PD 1651, I've had that in and out of quite a bit of water, swimming this and that, and it's held up fine so far, so you just never know. As you can see, the lug width on these is about the same, 20 millimeter. But unlike our previous comparison, the actual thickness of the lugs is a little bit more comparable on these two particular models. Not as different as it was on the Oyster Perpetual and the PT Time, where we saw a little bit of a bigger difference. So these two look a lot more similar on the wrist if you're not looking at it from the side. When you're looking at it from the top and you're sort of comparing the diameters overall, the visual, these look a lot closer to each other until you turn that wrist to the side and sort of get that profile view. We won't even go through the bracelet conversation again. Got rid of it, put it on this nice dark red sort of burgundy color strap from Barrio, which more closely matches the red minute and seconds on the chapter ring. This panda look is actually quite nice. I can really appreciate that there's not a ton of writing on the dial, right? You've just got the numbers and you've got the logo and it just says Chronograph. I actually appreciate the simplicity of the dial and keeping other text off of it. And these Daytonas are pretty near impossible to get for we'll call it, just say, the average person. It's certainly a long wait if you do end up getting one, typically. And so maybe you want to wear something in the meantime. I often have said that, maybe if you get an homage watch, you can get an idea ahead of time if you really like the look and the feel, the aesthetics. And though it's not a one-to-one, it's not exactly the same, gives you a chance to really think it through and get a feel for it in sort of a low-cost, non-committal sort of a way. And that's one good thing about exploring these watches, because, it's like, do I really want a 116-500? Well, maybe. Let me get something that kind of looks like it and put on the wrist and then see how much I wear it. Not just because of what it is. Do I really like picking it up and going out the door with it with those collars on my wrist? I don't buy watches to flip them, that kind of thing. It's, do I actually like it? Will I actually wear it? And that's really what this is about. And also it's just fun to take watches like this and just put them next to each other, even if they're on completely different tiers. Just seeing them in the flesh next to each other and doing that comparison, I think it brings perspective. It shows you how good something is, how maybe poor something is, or the pros and the cons and the balance, and how to actually appreciate, I think, in a sense, both ends of the watch collection, watch enthusiast spectrum. There's something out there for everybody. and I'm not into the whole looking up, looking down sort of thing. Certainly want to hear what you think about all this in the comments below. Stick around, subscribe, join as a member if you want some extra perks to see what's going on behind the scenes, and I'm out.